Welcome to our first collaboration and live event. I'm Stacy Sherman, customer experience, otherwise known as CX, advisor, keynote speaker, and the host of Doing CX Right podcast. I'm so thrilled to engage in this conversation with Soul Growth co-founders Stacy Gonzales and Renee Devore, especially today, International Women's Day. We bring you a variety of stories and diverse experiences. And for our listeners, please introduce yourselves where you're listening from in our chat. I'll also pay attention to your comments and questions, and we'll do our best to address them as time allows during this session, or we'll follow up thereafter. Before I dive in, we thought it would be insightful to share some facts about professional women leaders. Did you know new research indicates 43% of women leaders feel burned out when compared to 31% of their male counterparts? Successful women in midlife who've been climbing the career ladder are choosing to prioritize themselves and step down from their high powered corporate and nonprofit roles due to shifting priorities, burnout, and lack of support. The world is watching as fierce women like New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern and Sheryl Sandberg of Meta decided to step down from their roles to recharge, reconnect, and determine their next chapter on their own terms. Today, our goal is to have a conversation where our stories may ignite a spark inside women and many supportive men who are wondering how to get unstuck and how to have better balance between their personal and professional lives. We hope to empower women to begin to think deeply about their careers and the types of experiences that can help them embrace the challenges they are facing and find the inspiration they desire to take the next steps in favor of who they want to be and the life they want to live. Now, let's get into some lively conversations and actionable tips. I'm here with our amazing panel, Renee Devore and Stacy Gonzales, who are co-founders of Soul Growth, a company dedicated to empowering women to embrace new experiences and live the life they love. Both Renee and Stacy are former educational leaders who found themselves burnt out after climbing the career ladder. Stacy and Renee, I'm thrilled to be having this conversation with you. And to kick us off, Stacy, I'll start with you and then Renee to please chime in. Can you share about what challenging the status quo means to you in your career journey?
Well, first of all, absolutely. But I just want to say welcome. Welcome to everyone in the chat. We see you. Thank you for telling us where you're calling in from. We have East from Turkey. So we're all the way, we're international and International Women's Day. So welcome everyone to this important conversation. And so as I think about what challenging the status quo means for me, it's always been an inner sense that I've had. And it's really about that line and that area where I feel like I want to grow and push myself. And in my career, that was about every 3 to 5 years, probably every 5 years. And every 5 years, I knew there was something more for me, whether it was going from a teacher to school principal to district administrator, and then most recently leaving that education industry and challenging myself to get into understanding sales and marketing and startups and tech. And so for me, challenging the status quo is not only challenging other people and how they think, and women in particular, right? And challenging women to think about how they challenge themselves. But really, for me, it's been about challenging myself and thinking what's next and where do I need to grow? Renee?
Yeah, thanks. There's some good parallels there. Hello, everybody. I'm so excited to be here talking on International Women's Day with Stacy and Stacy and all of you. And you know, when I talk about challenging the status quo for me specifically, I have not led a status quo life per se. I'm 49 years old. I've never been married. I don't have kids. I started my career at a very young age of 21, teaching, just as Stacy did. And I don't know when it happened or how it happened, but I kind of took my independence as an only child and chose to kind of live a little bit more of a nomadic lifestyle, which was very much against the grain of what society told me I should be and do. I spent a lot of time, I think similar to Stacy, every 3 to 5 years, kind of thinking about, I was beginning to feel comfortable in those spaces, and I was looking for the next challenge, and I was looking for opportunities to grow. And somewhere along my life's journey, I really just began to think like these experiences that I had very early on, in my 20s and early 30s, were really becoming experiences in which I could learn from. And so I continue to kind of just harbor those experiences as opportunities to challenge the status quo. And in the field of education, in my career, and then also in life, one of the values I really hold for myself is being courageous, because I think when we're courageous and we stand up for our own beliefs and what's true for us, we're challenging the status quo of just getting uncomfortable, which not a lot of people love to get into that space. I love to get uncomfortable because I feel like that's where I grow best. And so I'm excited to share a little bit more of our journey today, my journey on challenging that status quo and getting unstuck, which similar to Stacy, I was stuck for 25 years in a career that wasn't really ever meant for me in the first place. So excited to share my story with you some more today. Stacy, what
Yeah.
about
Yeah, I love this conversation, especially with the two of you, because we come from such different backgrounds and different experiences. And you talk about being stuck. I mean, some of us knew we were stuck. Some of us were stuck and had experiences that made us unstuck. Some of it was proactive, some of it was reactive. And I think what we're talking about here is we have the choice to be unstuck proactively and share those learnings even when it's uncomfortable. And so I love it. And I also think, Renee, the fact that you bring out the fact that you are living where it's not just what society told you to do. And there's many people that can relate to that, where there's not a straight line
Mhm.
to, right? So I love that you brought that up. So let's go to the next question. There are warning signals. There's whispers that we all hear that you're getting stuck. And then what do you do about it? So Renee, let me ask you that. What whispers did you hear to make you pivot?
Well, I think it took me a while. I mean, it's a great question because I think it took me a while to really pay attention to the whispers. And when I tell my story, and actually, I just realized this just recently that I was trying to get unstuck in my first 3 years of teaching. I left after 3 years. I was in my hometown teaching and left to move to Southern California, and tried to get out of education then. There was a feeling inside me at the age of 24 that I was trying to get out of something that I didn't feel like I should be in. And then I kind of fell back into that comfort zone. And then I continued to teach. And then I got my master's degree and, went into education administration. I threw my resume out there hoping that, something might stick. Actually, I don't even think I was hoping for it. But there was these little things along the way. So I got this job as being a principal, and I knew within those first few years of being a principal that it did not feel like I was aligned to what I was doing.
Mm.
I ended up moving out to Chicago from LA. And after 6 years in Chicago, I honestly was coming home every single day, probably for the last 2 years of that principal position in Chicago, crying most days, not being able to have like healthy relationships and healthy boundaries for myself. I wasn't taking care of myself mentally. I wasn't taking care of myself physically. The relationships with my family and friends was suffering. Um, and it got to a point then where I decided like I can't do this anymore. Like I literally was on a place of just completely breaking down. I ended up selling everything I owned, taking two suitcases and my dog, and leaving everything behind and moving to Mexico for a year. And it was there that I thought, well, I'm going to transfer out of education, but I didn't. I didn't there. There was a lot of good things that happened for me there. I fell back into education, and within probably a month of being back in that role, the same role that I left to move to Mexico, I knew then, just in my gut, that I wasn't following my heart. I just knew it wasn't right for me. And then COVID hit and I was stuck. So, after COVID, I would say probably about, I think it was October of 2021, I had a complete mental breakdown. My therapist calls it a breakthrough, in which I took an entire month off from my career. And I said at that moment, I'm not going to do this again. I'm too important to myself. I've journeyed too far. I've worked too hard on myself, and told my boss at the time that I wasn't coming back. So there were little whispers along the way, really coming from my heart and my gut, that was telling me I wasn't aligned to the work that I was currently doing, and I needed to figure something else out.
Mm.
That's my story.
I love the story because not only did you pivot professionally, but you also took a chance and moved your life to Mexico. I mean, that's not your everyday occurrence.
No.
Right? So you really are a change agent, and whether it was in your weak moments or strength, I think that's strength, but
Mm.
it goes to show that you didn't just complain, you took action and you had to go figure it out. And even the pivot in, out, that's okay. Like, that's part of the process.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely.
I
I wouldn't
love
be here today. I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for that process. And I wouldn't be sitting here, with Stacy Gonzales, who's my co-founder, our co-founder with Soul Growth, because her journey is similar, but very different as well.
Hmm. I relate to this because I have not been in the education system, but I've been in corporate America for 25 years. And I've been held back from seats at the table where decisions have been made a lot by men. And earlier in my career, I ignored the feeling and the thoughts that something didn't feel right, that my voice was being blocked. And I didn't lean in as much in my younger years because of fear. But then I learned how to ask for what you need in a win-win approach. And sometimes there was success with that and sometimes there were not. But I think we learned from both scenarios. So, on this topic, let's talk about, what do you do when you challenge the status quo, you ask for what you want, and it is met with resistance? So let me start, Stacy.
Yeah, that's such a great question, because, to the previous point that you were talking about, you start to feel these whispers. You start to have this sense that there's something more, something different, or it's time to make a change. And so I know for me, as I sat with that, at that time, I had a really awesome my assistant. And she was also my confidant, right? Like, when you have an assistant, that's the person that's loyal to you. And so she was my confidant. And and she sees everything in the office and she's around all the time. So we had been talking and I knew there was this calling for something more for me. And so I decided, I had talked to my boss several times about, really, and honestly, I just wanted a title change. I didn't even necessarily want more money or a promotion. I wanted a title change because I felt that the title change would give me some different type of a credibility. Many people, I hear this in corporate all the time when people are applying for jobs, especially in the tech space, right? And so that's all I really wanted. And I remember, like, in my review, and I always got excellent, excellent reviews. And so I went in and I asked her for it. And she was just kind of, nothing was moving, nothing was happening. And so I thought, well, I want this out in the open and I don't want to go to the superintendent, without the other people. There were 3 cabinet level members. So I'm like, I'm just going to invite, when they start their meeting, I'm going to go in to the meeting and say, can I pop in for 10 minutes and share some things with you? And I'm going to tell you what, thinking back now on that event, it backfired on me. It did not go well. I got pulled into another meeting with the superintendent, got like scolded and reprimanded. Like things just did not go well for me. I was very hurt. It was very personal for me. It felt like a personal attack. And I didn't know what to do. And I couldn't find a way in my heart to separate who these people were from the facts of what they were doing. I was combining that and giving them benefit of the doubt and believing the best. And it really turned out to bite me because it was met with resistance. And so because I couldn't take the facts of these people don't see you, they don't value you, they don't respect you in the way that they went about you coming in wholehearted, really coming in and trying to share. And so because of that, because of my inability to see that resistance for what it was and pivot, it took me another year before it caused me to have a breakdown and actually end up leaving.
I think that's a great reminder, because when we do learn to advocate for ourselves, which we tell our kids in this generation, speak up, advocate for yourself with your teachers. When we do, and it's not embraced, it just kiboshes us, but you can't lose that strength. And I encourage listeners, people to gain that strength. And even your end of year in corporate world, there's appraisals and ratings and about your performance and education. I'm sure you're reviewed. And it's like, how do you not let that define you? But you have to. It's just one person's opinion in that moment in time for what they know of you.
Yes.
Right. So, oh my gosh, I commend you for going in there, speaking up, and despite the outcome, not letting it change your entire being, so that today you can be here and show up.
Yeah. And like, I wish that wasn't my story. I wish that wasn't what had happened. Well, actually, though, no, I don't. Like at the time, maybe I thought that, but now I'm like, maybe had not happened, I wouldn't be here now. Right. And so those lessons that we learn when we actually go in and we take the risk, not knowing what the outcome's going to be, because we don't get to predict outcomes. That's just not how life works, right? So take the risk. If you've got that sense inside, take the risk, see what you learn from it. But then believe people when they show you who they are.
Oh, that is, yes. Repeat. It's interesting. I had a unique experience of strength when I got shot down. So I would ask for what I needed, again, in a win-win approach for the company and for me. And so when I was told no, I did stay far longer at the company than I could have. I don't want to say should have. Don't should on ourselves. But what I did was I had to take some energy and do something with it, that they stopped me, they blocked me, and kept me in my box. So I started a side hustle, and I started passion projects night and weekends. And here I am, like 5 years later, and that side hustle has really blossomed. And I just want people to think about that wherever you are and whatever you're doing. It is never too late to start your passion projects, because you never know when plan B can turn into plan A.
Stacey, I connect so much with the box that you speak to. And I think a lot of women probably will connect to that in their careers and where they work, right? I think for somebody who has always challenged that box and trying to get out of it, I've always been judged as a principal, especially always been judged for how I looked, what my gender was, what my sexuality was. Any of those pieces were constantly judged. You know, that's the status quo that people were bringing to the table and forcing upon me, trying to put me in a box, right? Whereas I was really trying to break out of that box and just show up as I am, which I would imagine many of our listeners are probably in that same position, as are the three of us, right? Wanting to not stay in that box and break free from that, to really come as we are to the table and not based on anybody else's definitions of what they think we should be.
And if we don't get out of the box, if we don't
Mm.
stay out of the box, things are never going to change for the next generation.
Nope.
And
Not
so
at all.
that's why this conversation is essential, that we have it here and we continue it, because that box is the old way, not the new way.
Mm. Love
Let
this.
me get into a topic that is so important. And I don't know that people actually take the time to talk about core values. To be able to challenge the status quo wherever you live and wherever you work, you have to know your own core values. So, can you share a bit about how your values have helped you to challenge the status quo and the results you experienced? I'll start with Stacy.
Yeah. So when I started to realize I probably needed to leave this career that I built for 20 years, my identity was so wrapped up in my career identity. My actual identity was what I could do, who I was in my job. I'd spent a lot of effort and energy learning, right? Getting a doctorate, like all the things, being known as an expert in the field, doing all the things. And when I left, I didn't really know who I was. I was like back to my younger, 20s existential crisis. What's the meaning of life? What's my purpose in the world? All of those things. And I started to think about what is really important to me and what values are really important to me. And I remember my husband and I actually made a video recording of it, sat in this office. I have a whiteboard on the wall you can't see here. And we whiteboarded for 2 days words and thesaurus and what it means and what they look like and how those words, how they feel to me. And because I wanted like my top 3 core identity words. And so I came up with communication, integrity, and trust. And then once I got clear on just literally like what the words were that resonated with me, then what does communication look like in business relationships? What does communication look like with friendships, with my partner, with my children, with my parents, with, right? Like what is healthy communication? What is unhealthy communication? Integrity. What does living from a place of integrity mean for me? And so I really just, you have to take the time for yourself. Nobody's going to do this work for you. Nobody's going to tell you what your values should be. If they are telling you, that's a problem, right? Like if you don't take the time to figure that out and process, and we're going to drop a link in the chat as a resource. Renee Brown has an awesome exercise with a list of words. And allow yourself, it's going to take time. It takes time to identify those core values. But now when I have a difficult or something's feeling off, one of my huge core values, Renee and I, we had a difficult conversation. And it was kind of like our first conflict. And I was like, oh my gosh, we're having I don't know what to do. And I was like, no, a value of yours is communication. We can put a pin in this and then revisit because I'm being triggered, right? And then we revisited and we communicated 2 days later and like worked through resolution. And so I couldn't have done that 5 years ago. And I had to do the inner work that it took to understand those values for myself.
I want to call out what you said about values, knowing your values, and what's reality is that the places we work often impose their values on us. And therefore, it is so important that you work for a place that matches your values. I don't know that we did that. I don't know that I paid attention to that in my early years.
No, and if you don't know what your values are clearly, when you're interviewing them and you're meeting team members and people throughout the organization, how do you know if you're in alignment if you don't know what your values mean to you? Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. What about you, Renee? Tell
Yeah.
me.
It's so great to hear, because even though Stacy and I really know each other, we still are learning from each other, even in conversations like this. And I honestly don't think, other than the value of knowing that I wanted to serve others, like I knew from a very early age that that was something that I wanted to get into a career and do. Which is kind of how I fell into teaching. I mean, there's more behind that story as well, but that's not important to this conversation. So that's really like the only value that I really knew until I actually got out of education and I was trying to pivot and transition into something very different, and I was getting stuck, right? So I was trying to leave education and move into corporate, basically moving from one box into another box, right? But I didn't realize that it was 6 months of, actually, it was longer than 6 months, probably 8 months of searching for these roles in corporate, where I was like, why is this not working for me? These comes like the whispers. Those are some of the whispers too. It's like, why am I getting rejected over and over again? What is that saying to me? And I met this wonderful person, John Maxwell, who worked with me. And the very first question he asked me was, what are your values? Like, who are you and what are you seeking? And I was like, well, that's a loaded question. I don't know, right? I know I want to help others. He's like, okay, well, that's great that you want to serve others, but what are the values you hold for yourself? And one of those values is the courageousness that I talked about before, that I've really carried with me through my entire, adult life, is the courage to step to the edge, and to take that leap and not retreat back. I mean, there were some instances where I did retreat back, but I've always kind of had the courage to try those new things and those new experiences. Um, I also think that, when I was thinking about what I was seeking, right? I was seeking, this opportunity to have more freedom, to have independence, to have choice. That would also allow me that creative spirit. That was another value of mine that I didn't know that I had. This creative, expressive spirit of mine needed to be able to flourish. So going from one system, which is public schools, right? Being courageous, wanting to be creative and expressive, wanting to have this freedom and independence and choice. I was in the wrong system, right? When you think of those words and you think of a public school system, those are the wrong values, they are not aligned to that box, right? And then I was trying
Unless
to
you're a
pivot.
kindergarten teacher.
Yeah.
Unless you're a kindergarten teacher.
Yeah, totally, totally. Then and then I was trying to pivot into another box, right? Into something that probably was going to be very similar in a lot of ways. Um, and I was kind of falling back into that comfort zone of going from education into corporate because it felt comfortable. It gave me the structure, right? It gave me the benefits. It gave me the 401k, whatever it did. It gave me something that I needed to have to feel comfortable. And it wasn't until Stacy came into my world, and we started having conversations around our dreams, that I began to realize, well, maybe it's not going from one box into another box. Maybe this is really about like thinking bigger than a box, right? And Stacy actually helped me to see that. Like I knew what my values were, I just didn't know where those values would lead me, which is to where Stacy and I are today, as far as co-founding a business that is very important to us, because we've been in the position of not feeling empowered, right? And wanting to create those opportunities, experiences for women, just as we didn't necessarily have early on. I feel more free, more courageous, more aligned, more opportunity to be creative and expressive than I ever have, because I'm aligned to those core values of who I currently am and what I'm seeking. I think it's such an important part of this journey, that we're all on, figuring out where we're supposed to be and how do we follow our hearts.
Great point. And it relates to me at this very second
Mm.
because the two of you have figured out your pivots and you're moving forward. And I am literally standing at the fork, in the road, if that's the right saying. And and I literally am determining my values, and do I go back to comfort of corporate world, or do I take that side hustle that I've been doing for 5 years and turn that into uh the next phase of my life? And so what are my values and where do I best get matched to live that? And so everything you're saying is so true. And the people that have lost their jobs recently, or those that are on the edge of losing, or just want to pivot, I think that knowing your values is a great start. What you're defining here, so important. Um, I would say, Renee, how did you actually? Do you remember that there's a certain thing that made you say, "Done, pivot, let's
Oh
go"?
yeah. I can tell you the day that it happened. It was October 20 or October 1st of 2021. I had come home from an arduous day at work. It was Friday, 6 p.m. My partner had told me that he was going to be home late to dinner that night. And I honestly just flipped. I don't even know. It wasn't even about him being late. I literally went into my bed, curled in my covers, and started bawling my eyes out. And just slithered off the bed onto the ground. And my whole body, and people will understand this if they've been through panic attacks before, which I had never been through one before in my life, so I didn't know what it was. I thought I was having a stroke. Right, my face was paralyzed, my hands were paralyzed. I didn't know what was happening. All I could do was get to the phone and call my partner Tim to be able to come home, because I had no idea what was happening to me. And because I had taken that year off in Mexico, right, where it was just an opportunity for me to reset, to slow down, to give myself grace, to find other things that brought me joy, to really explore new ways of being. Um, I had had that moment to kind of reset. And so, 2 years after that experience, I'm in this space on the ground, in paralysis, because I'm carrying so much weight around with me from what I was doing, in education, having to get people and all of us through COVID and get myself through, the feelings and the mental health and all those kinds of things of the pandemic. Um, that moment, I literally, after I was kind of settled after my panic attack, I literally called my boss in that moment, which maybe wasn't the best time to do it because I was so emotional, and said, "I'm not coming back. I'm not going to do this to myself anymore." I was in that place in Chicago before. I mentioned that earlier in this segment. I was in that place before where I was coming home crying all the time. My relationships were unsatisfactory, and I was in that place again. I had basically just doubled up on what I had done before, taken a whole year off to go to Mexico to not be in that place, and then I had fallen back into that space again. And it was in that moment of that breakdown, and I took the entire month off to really just get back to myself, to recenter myself, and know that the decision that I had just made on October 1st of 2021 was going to be the next chapter of the rest of my life. And so I absolutely will remember that day and moment, from this point forward, because it was such an important part of my journey.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, it's really empowering to take the pain
Mm,
and turn it around.
mm,
And you just had to go through it. I don't
yeah.
care what God you believe in, but the universe delivered the pain and you didn't ignore it. And perhaps you couldn't ignore it. You didn't have a choice. Sometimes we have to get bonked over the head for shifts to happen.
Mm,
So I love the story, and thank you for being vulnerable to share it, because we all can learn from it.
mm,
Sometimes we don't get that lowness. We
yeah.
just live in the pain. Um, and so sometimes also the change is done unto us. So I got a phone call unexpectedly, completely, I'll just leave it at that, unexpectedly, and told immediately my job was eliminated, and it's not personal. It's budget cuts. It's not personal. Read the 4 agreements. You'll understand. Life is not personal. At the same time, what I want to tell people is that there is a real grieving process.
Mm.
And I didn't understand that recently. I didn't understand what is grieving. I'm lucky enough that nobody really close to me has passed away in a long time. And so grieving, I'm like, I'm not grieving, but yet actually any kind of loss brings grieving. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be just death. It's loss of connections, it's loss of a job, it's loss of financial security, whatever it is. So I just want people to understand that there is grieving. And even when you make the choice to leave, there's grieving of people, right? The two of you had those people, those connections, those friendships. So I don't think we talk enough about grieving because it's just so uncomfortable. But there really is a grieving process, and you have to allow yourself to go through it, then rise above it, give yourself a date and say, okay, got to get my groove back. And
Yeah.
finally, I'm getting there. And ask for help. That's not weakness, it's strength.
Yeah, there's something really interesting around the grieving process that I think is pertinent to this conversation. I was with my daughter the other day, and we were in a restaurant, and she was tearing up, and she didn't want the tears to come out in the restaurant. And number one, there's no shame in crying. There's no shame in feelings. Our feelings are valid and they're information for us. But what I was able to say to her was, these tears are this, because she's going through some things, are pain leaving your body. And one of the gifts that women have, and what makes this so relevant on International Women's Day, is that we have a greater ability to be in touch with our feelings and express our feelings more. And the society allows us or expects us, right? So there's a little bit more cushion to feel our feelings. Now, strong women, Renee and I have talked about this a ton, we err at times on the side of working really hard for masculine energy. That does not serve us well, right? We are feminine. We have ability to lead from a different place in a different way. And when we deny that part of us, we deny ourselves. And so all that to say, the grieving process is real, and allowing yourself to process through that is really important because it releases that energy and allows you to embrace the energy that you need to vibrate higher and go to the next level, which is ultimately what we all want when we start to grow.
Growing also brings this, I would call it radical acceptance that there's so much you don't know. You don't know what you don't know. You didn't know when you went to Mexico what life would be. And it's part of getting comfortable. It's part of living. That you don't know what you don't know, and don't let that stop you.
Yeah. That is such a powerful statement. And I think that we get so caught up in the fear of the what ifs, right? What if this doesn't work out? And I've moved a lot of different places in my 25 years, and I've had a lot of different job opportunities. And in every single experience I've gone into, I've always said nothing has to be forever, right? That's kind of given me my own personal out of, I'm going to go into whatever this experience is, whether it's moving to Mexico, moving to Vermont, becoming a principal of a high school versus principal of a middle school, whatever it was, and know that when I walk out of this experience, I will have grown from it. So it may not have been the best experience, one that I look back on and say, yeah, that was the best 3 years of my life. It doesn't matter. It's what did I learn and how did I grow from that experience that really is where I place my value. So although, we can fear the change and the uncertainty and not knowing what's ahead for us, if we can embrace that a little bit more and know that we're walking into an experience that we can learn and grow from, I think that there's so much power we give back to ourselves in getting to that edge, right? And being able to take that leap, knowing that we're going to grow because of it. So I think amazing statement.
Do you think, Renee, and I'll get to you, Stacy, do you think that that experience in Mexico propelled you to take the actions that you are now?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think people, when I tell them that I took a year off in Mexico, they think, well, that must have been a transformational year. I think it started the transformation for me, right? I don't think that it was the end all be all, because I think we're all on a journey. And I think if we all think that we just stop at a certain point, then we just stop growing, to be quite honest with you. That was a place where I was able to release my title of being a principal, which I carried with me everywhere I went. I was really able to just show up as I was, right? Come as you are. I came as I was. Nobody knew me there. Nobody cared about what I did. Like, I was just able to walk freely through the earth, just being Renee, right? And my dog Lola. We just walked freely through the earth. And it was such a beautiful, liberating feeling. And so when I got to that space again, when I moved to Vermont and I took on that other role and position, and I started feeling the walls to close in on me again, I had that experience to come from to say, oh, no, we like that other experience better. And it wasn't because I didn't have a job or I was living in Mexico and hanging out on the beach, whatever. It wasn't because of that. It was because the titles and the judgments and all of those things, the status quo, right, was caving in on me again. So did I answer your question? I feel like I went off on a tangent there, Stacy.
No, you did. And I want to pull out one thing you just said. It's not just the status quo of your story, it's also the status. Because titles give us this false status, right? And that makes us stay with the status quo. And so you gave up titles to actually show up and be you without this title that you have to live by.
Right. I never felt aligned to that title. Right. So I wanted to rid myself of all labels, all titles, any judgment. I literally, that move to Mexico allowed me for 1 year to just walk through this life as I am. And now in these last 7 or 8 months, I'm able to do the exact same thing on my own terms, right? And building a company to help others do the same.
With the title you chose.
Exactly.
That's the bottom line here.
Yes.
Stacy, what's your views on this? And I have a particular question also around the thing that makes us stuck. I'll speak for me, I get stuck, is overcoming this money thing, that money mindset and revenue generation. And some of us are breadwinners of our family. Some, just have that need regardless. But what's your view? How do you deal with that in uncertainty?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we call it the golden handcuffs. Because I went from a very secure, there's nothing more secure than a job and education. Nobody gets fired unless you do something really dumb and egregious. Like, you're guaranteed your customers are coming and your paycheck is happening. You know ahead of time, right? You know what your budget is. And so I thought, okay, this is going to be great. I'm going to go and I'm going to be able to generate my own revenue and be on my own because I know who I am. And you heard me say I was having an identity crisis. So clearly I didn't know who I was. So the second part of that is figuring out how to, anytime you're dealing with a fixed mindset or a mindset change in your life, I like to think of it as like an ocean. Because a lot of times when you have patterns in your life of thinking, habitual patterns of thinking that you don't recognize, you see like in the ocean, right? You see the waves crashing and you see the top of the ocean and the surface and things are moving and happening, but you don't actually see what's at the root deep down underneath. That's in your unconscious. It's really hard. How do you know what you don't know when you have something that you're struggling with? For me, it's a belief system around money with the messages that I was told as a woman, as a middle class from a middle class blue collar family, around how you get money, how you think about money, how you talk about money, right? Like you have to work really hard, you have to work longer, harder, smarter. You have to prove yourself or you're not worth the extra of whatever it is. So I could see on the surface the things where like I have one kid who asks me for a million things and expects me to spend a ton of money. And then I have one kid that will never ask me for anything. But both of those I've realized are from my limited belief system when it comes to money. That's my evidence. My evidence is what I can see at the top of the water. And so for me, this has been my number one next level challenge. And the way I'm approaching it is number one, becoming really truthful about it. I have limiting beliefs that are holding me back around revenue generation. I've not been able to make it click and work for myself financially yet. What are those limiting beliefs? Where's the root of them? What beliefs do I want to have instead? How do I want to feel instead? What will it look like when I have X amount of dollars, when I'm making X amount a day? This, like, you don't change your beliefs by wanting to. If you say, I'm worried about money, I'm anxious about this, or you actually perpetuate that same way of being. You're actually sending yourself signals that is what you want. Your fear is holding you back from that. And so it's about getting quiet, getting still. In the moment, what I'm doing is I'm spending the next 30 days. I met with my coach yesterday. I've worked out a plan for 30 days. Anytime a subtle mindset thought pops up in my head that says like, oh, you shouldn't ask that person for that, or you can't afford that, or you can't, I got a little journal and I jot it down. And then at the end of the night, I'm spending 15 minutes just celebrating the fact that I'm noticing my thought patterns, right? You don't change thought patterns unless you take the time to do it. And so I put a plan in place to be able to do that. And accountability partners, and I'm sharing it publicly, right? Sharing it publicly, being not ashamed of it. I'm not ashamed of it. I know who I am. Just because my bank account isn't full right now does not devalue me any less as a human being. Doesn't make me any less worthy. Doesn't make me deserve anything less than anybody else. And so I think for me, and for women who've worked really hard to get to a certain place in their career, especially the challenges women in particular face, it's really hard for us to begin to think differently, but it's totally possible. And when you overcome those limiting beliefs and mindsets, there's no stopping you in other areas.
So know your values.
Know your values.
Know your limiting beliefs. Write them down.
Yep.
Have an accountability partner or partners.
Write down the limiting beliefs and then write down what you want the new belief to be. Right? Because we don't want you focusing. We need you to recognize it, notice it. And then what do you want to start practicing to put in place? Like what I just said to you, I have great value. My value isn't dependent upon the money I earn. Right? That's the new belief.
Yes. Have a plan.
Have a plan.
And have the plan is not so easy, because in my case with the fork in the road, I am figuring out a plan, and you have a coach, and some people might need a coach. Other people might just need a really good friend. Whatever that is, you need a plan, because otherwise you're driving with no GPS.
Yes.
Right? So get a plan, figure out a plan.
Have a vision. Have a vision. Spend time closing your eyes, imagining yourself 6 months from now, seeing a dollar amount in the bank, and see your facial expression, see how you're walking, see how you're moving, see how you're being. Imagine yourself more confident, whatever the vision is for you. Spend time. Your mind wants to work for you. It wants to serve you. It gives you the thought patterns. It's efficient and effective. make the vision plain and easy for it to generate for you.
I want to call out another thing you said, which is very actionable, and that is to celebrate your wins and your milestones. And that sounds like no duh.
Yes.
However, I am guilty of that. Even at my biggest successful peaks and marathons and whatever I've run metaphorically and real, I did not stop to celebrate. I was just like, check, move on.
Yeah. Yeah.
So make sure that you do that. And I want to give a favorite app. There's no affiliation. I don't care if you get it or don't get it. I'm just giving you something that works for me. It's called the 5-Minute Journal, and it's an app. And literally, you wake up in the morning and it asks you, what are you going to do today to make it fulfilling? And then there's like one other little question. That's it. Then at the end of the night, it asks you, what did you do to make it a great day? And you can customize some of the questions. So you set the intention for the day, and then at night you say what you did. And sometimes I'll use that app as during the day to write it down so that I have that energy, like, okay, I had 3 good things today, even if it was tiny, tiny little things. So I recommend that as a tool, and you could take pictures also and put it in that day so you could flash back on time and say, oh, I forgot about that. Oh, that's good. That's good. So yeah, celebrate those wins. Thank you, Eric, for being here.
I love that. I love that. Renee is amazing. It's bringing time. Last week I was sick. I'm going through stuff with my daughter. We were on a phone call and I'm like, right? Like whatever the thing was. And I wasn't like really complaining, but I was just facts. Like, here's the facts. Fact number 1, this happened. Fact number 2, I need to shore you up on this. And then she said, after my 5 minutes, she said, let's just pause for a minute. I want to take a minute because there's a bunch of celebrations I heard in there. And I had my journal in front of me. I had my notebook in front of me. And she's like, number 1, you said you woke up today feeling better because I was sick, better than you did yesterday. That's a win. Number 2, and like she had heard 4 wins in my, so everybody needs a Renee Devore in their life, essentially. If you don't get the journal, get a Renee Devore. And
That's
right?
that's
Get a Renee
perfect.
Devore. And like, I do want to point out, we are women in business working in partnership and doing it how I think women can succeed together in business. It's a very different approach. It's a very different way of being. And I think we discount ourselves, and women don't collaborate and coordinate a lot of times because they're competitive or their feelings get hurt and they don't communicate about things, or they store up stuff. And like, there's a different way to do this, and to really empower women, I think we have to lead the way in ways of being that we can show that this works when we work ourselves.
Yes. I also want to throw in a statement here because I also think about the most amazing men, and I'm not getting into pronouns here. It's just, traditional, whatever, men, male, how much they matter. And maybe for my kids, I hope that there will be a day where there's not like leadership with a gender in front. It's just leaders. We're leaders, and you don't even need the word leader to be in your job title to be one. You are one. So that's my hope for and to help inspire that with you. As we're getting to the very end here, I want to ask both of you one of my favorite questions I ask on every single podcast of mine. If you could go back in time and give advice to your 20-year-old self based on what you know now that you didn't know then, what would it be? I'll start with Renee.
Yeah, I love this question. And it's funny because when I think about like who I was at 20 and who I am now, I mean, of course there are differences, right? There's 29 years worth of experiences and differences. But But I feel like when I look back at my younger self, I've always been really the same person for the last 35, 40 years since I can remember middle school, high school. And I do remember there was a time in my life where I was really comparing my life to others, right? Like where everybody else was going, who was going to get married at a certain time. People were going to, right after college, going to go and huddle down and get married. And I would just say back to my 20-year-old self, because I didn't know it then. I knew it pretty early on, but I didn't know it then. To just let your life unfold the way it's supposed to. Like pay attention to those whispers. Pay attention to what your heart feels, like what your gut says to you. Stop overthinking things so much and really pay attention to like what's in your spirit and soul to help guide the way that your life is supposed to unfold. Um, I think I've done a really good job of that in many respects, but I think I'm also really good at overthinking things and overanalyzing. And that's where I get stuck, is when I start overanalyzing, overthinking, and not following my gut or my heart. So that's what I probably would tell my 20-year-old self. What do you think, Stacy? What would you say?
Which
You go, Stacey.
Me or Stacy S? Either one.
I would say don't dismiss your intuition. And I was really in tune with my intuition when I first met Tim Gonzales and we were 19 and like life was easy peasy because you didn't have real responsibility and kids and all that stuff. And then I just, like I said earlier, got into that like masculine energy and thinking that's how you dominate in the world and that's how you like roll like a boss or whatever nonsense, right? And so I think like don't dismiss that and allow yourself to your point, Renee, notice and feel your way through. Life's going to happen whether you show up to it or not. So let's show up to it.
And I want to call out Eric's comment that most influential mentors he's had over his last 20 years are and have been women. And that's so positive to hear because, that's not always the case. So thank you for that comment. I would say if I could go back in time, I would be more, even now, to be very, very hyper intentional how you use your time and energy. And because I do everything with purpose, but sometimes I'll be like a squirrel and I'll be like, oh, wait, I love that thing. Oh, wait, then over that thing, oh, then that thing. And you can't be a kid in the candy store every day, every minute. So back to plans, back to knowing your direction, back to knowing your values and having an accountability partner to make sure that you stay on track, know your North Star, and then spend your time with the right people in the right place at the right time. You have to be very, very intentional with your time and preserve it. So I think that's where I didn't always pay attention to that. Well, we are coming to the end here. I'm going to say rapid fire. One takeaway that you want people to remember. And I also want to say that for everyone, if you missed any part of this, or if you want someone that you think would benefit from listening to this, we're doing this again today at 5:00 Central, 6 p.m. Eastern time. And bring your questions, bring your thoughts, bring your friends, and help us make sure that this gets out there because together we make a difference. So rapid fire. I'm going to start with Stacy. What's your one takeaway you want people to remember?
You have everything that you need inside of you already. It's there. You might not notice it. You might not be able to access it perfectly yet, but it's there. And if you get quiet and you get still and listen closely, it'll start to become more palpable.
Love that. Renee?
Yeah, I would just follow up on what Stacy said. Get rid of the noise, right? There's a lot of noise around us. Get rid of the noise, tune it out, center yourself, find your core values, follow your heart, and lead your own path and come as you are. Stacy, what about you?
I'll finalize this by saying we are never stuck. We're never stuck. Get out of the box. Challenge the status quo. Even if you feel like an imposter, just do it. And thank you. Thank you for everyone being here with us, and just appreciate you and together making a difference.